Imagine discovering that your dead husband built a $100 million empire while you were working in a windowless office, patching his shirts and buying cheaper groceries. Now imagine having the power to destroy everyone who made you invisible, and imagine actually doing it. This is the story of Margaret, a woman who inherited wealth and used it as a weapon, who chose revenge over healing, who nearly destroyed her entire family before realizing that becoming a perpetrator doesn't erase being a victim. But here's what you need to know before this story unfolds. This is not about triumph. This is about the moment when Margaret has to choose between continuing down the path of destruction or finding the strength to do something much harder, break the generational cycle of abandonment and harm that her husband started and she almost perpetuated. Before we begin, I need you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below telling me what city you're listening from right now. Because this story is going to force you to look at yourself and ask the question that will haunt you. What invisible people in your life are you making smaller? Well, let's begin. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, and I didn't recognize the sender's name. David Chen, Property Management Services. My hands began to tremble as I opened it, sitting at the edge of the bed in the studio apartment I shared with my daughter Emma, the one I paid half the rent for while she and her husband Thomas treated me like a guest in a home that should have welcomed me as family. The first line read, "Ms. Donnelly, we need to discuss your portfolio immediately." Portfolio. The word hung there like an accusation. I had no portfolio. I had no investments. I had a job as a data entry clerk, a salary that barely covered my portion of the rent, and a life so small it could fit inside a shoebox without touching the sides. My fingers moved across the keyboard with the mechanical precision that decades of data entry had trained into them, and I clicked on the attachment. The screen filled with images, buildings, storefronts, office complexes, residential towers climbing toward the sky. My vision blurred. The document began with a title: Meridian Capital Holdings, Complete Property Portfolio. Below that, a list of addresses, square footage, current tenants, annual revenues that made my hands shake so badly I had to put the laptop down on the mattress beside me. I couldn't breathe. I stood up and walked to the window of the apartment, looking down at the street where ordinary people were living ordinary lives, completely unaware that somewhere in the universe, the ground beneath my feet had begun to crack open. The email continued below the attachment, each sentence more impossible than the last. My late husband, Marcus Donnelly, had been listed as a silent partner in an investment fund called Meridian Capital Holdings for the past 18 years. 18 years. We had been married for 32. Marcus had come home tired every evening, complaining about his job and insurance claims, telling me we needed to tighten our belts, asking me to shop at discount grocery stores and buy the cheaper cuts of meat that took longer to cook, but stretched further in the pot. I had sewn patches into his work shirts. I had reheeled his shoes at a repair shop that charged $7 and took 2 weeks. I had done without new clothes for 5 years so that we could afford to send Emma to a better school. All the while, my husband had been someone I did not know, someone who inhabited a completely different universe from the one we shared. The email explained that following a recent audit, they had discovered that Marcus's widow, me, had never been informed of the holdings. Now that he had been deceased for 4 years, following the proper channels of inheritance law, all properties and associated accounts were legally mine. The amount made my vision swim. 23 properties, an annual revenue exceeding $4 million, offshore accounts, stocks, bonds. My knees gave out, and I sat on the edge of the bed, reading the same sentences over and over, as if repetition might transform them into something my mind could actually process. I did not call Emma that night. I did not call anyone. I simply sat in the darkness of my small room in her apartment, listening to the sounds of her life happening on the other side of the wall, the television, her laughter, Thomas's voice, the clink of glasses as they had wine after dinner, something they did most nights now, something I had never been invited to join. My mind moved backward through time, cataloging every moment of deprivation, every sacrifice, every time I had told myself that this was love, that this was what marriage meant, that this was the price of partnership with another person. I thought about the vacation we never took, the kitchen we never renovated, the car we drove until it finally died, and I walked to work for 3 months before we could afford to buy a used Toyota with 130,000 miles already on it. All of that time, Marcus had been building an empire. All of that time, while I was making myself smaller and smaller, while I was learning to take up less space and want less and be less, my husband was constructing a separate world that had nothing to do with me. I understood then that I had not just been married to a liar. I had been married to someone who was compartmentalizing his entire existence, someone who had learned to be multiple people simultaneously, and I had never even suspected it was possible. The meeting with David Chen was scheduled for Friday. I didn't sleep Wednesday or Thursday. I moved through the apartment like a ghost, watching Emma and Thomas with new eyes, seeing everything differently now that I knew what they didn't know I knew. Emma had asked me recently to pay for her trip to Cancun. She had called it a birthday gift, though her birthday had been 6 months earlier. $4,000. I had given it to her without hesitation, money I had saved for 4 months by working through my lunch breaks and taking on extra shifts that left me exhausted and hollow inside. I watched her now, and I calculated how many hours of work that vacation had cost me. I watched Thomas kiss her cheek, and I wondered if he knew, if he had ever once considered what I was sacrificing simply to maintain the fiction that I was a valued member of this household rather than a servant with familial obligations. My grandson Oliver was playing with expensive toys that cost more than I spent on clothes in a year. I looked at his face and I wondered if Marcus would have wanted this for him, if my husband would have approved of the way his money, the money he had hidden from me, the money he had never shared, was now being used to purchase comfort for people who didn't even know it existed. Friday morning, I met David Chen at his office downtown, in a glass building that intimidated me simply by existing. He was younger than I expected, maybe 42, with careful eyes that suggested he had delivered bad news many times before. He did not make small talk. He placed a thick folder in front of me and began to explain the portfolio in a voice that was practiced, but not unkind. Not just the portfolio, he explained, but the accounts, the deeds, the offshore holdings in my name that I had never signed, my signature that had been forged decades ago by Marcus himself, protecting the assets from his previous life, protecting them from claims that might have been made, protecting them in a way that suggested he had always been planning for this moment, always been preparing for the day when this wealth would need to be hidden even from his current wife. And then David pulled out another file, one that made his jaw tighten slightly as he opened it. "There's additional information," he said carefully, "that you should know about." The file contained photographs. A young woman with Marcus's eyes. A man who was clearly a younger version of my husband, smiling in a way I had never seen him smile. Children. A wedding invitation from 1987. Divorce papers. Court records showing that Marcus had fathered a daughter with a woman named Sarah Chen and had paid no child support after the divorce was finalized, had never acknowledged the child, had simply disappeared from that life as if it had never happened. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold the photograph. "What am I looking at?" I asked, though I already knew. David's voice was very quiet when he answered. "Your husband had a daughter, Sophie Chen. She's 35 years old now. She lives in this city. She has no idea who her father is, or at least she didn't until recently. She took a genealogical DNA test about 6 months ago and discovered that she had a half-sister, your daughter Emma, through a biological connection. That's how she found out about Marcus. That's how she started looking." I couldn't speak. David gave me water. He gave me tissues. He explained that upon further investigation, he had discovered documents suggesting that Marcus had written a will intending to leave 30% of his estate to Sophie Chen. But the will had been filed incorrectly, misfiled in another county, never properly registered because Marcus had died before he could correct the error. His death had been sudden, a heart attack in his office. He was 54 years old. I was at work when it happened. I found out through a phone call from his office manager. I remember sitting in my cubicle under the fluorescent lights and feeling nothing at first, and then feeling everything, and then feeling nothing again. 4 years ago, and I was still finding out new ways that I had been lied to by a dead man. Sophie Chen apparently had discovered the misfiled will through her own legal investigations. She had hired a lawyer. She was building a case to claim her inheritance. But, David said carefully, watching my face, she doesn't know about the other properties yet. She doesn't know the full scope of what Marcus left behind. She doesn't know about you beyond the fact that you're Emma's mother. This could take years to litigate, or you could choose to contact her, acknowledge her claim, and negotiate a settlement. I understood what he was really saying. He was suggesting that I voluntarily give up millions of dollars to a woman I had never met, a woman who was the physical proof of my husband's infidelity, the living evidence that Marcus had constructed a life parallel to mine, that he had been someone else entirely, someone more real perhaps than the man who had come home to me each evening and lied through his teeth. Why would I do that? I asked. David was quiet for a moment, and then he said, because my mother spent 32 years with a man who kept secrets. She believed his lies were her fault. She believed she had failed him somehow. She died 2 years ago, and in her final weeks, she told me that she wished she had demanded the truth, demanded to know who he really was, demanded to know if the life she was living was real or if it had all been a performance. He paused. I won't watch that happen again. I won't help someone else disappear into the shadow of another person's lies. That afternoon, after leaving David's office, I returned to the apartment and did something I had not allowed myself to do in years. I opened my drawer and pulled out the photograph from my wedding day. 27 years old, hopeful, wearing a dress my mother had sewn for me. Marcus stood beside me, his hand on my waist, his smile confident and genuine looking. I stared at that face and tried to see the man who had built an empire while his wife bought cheaper cuts of meat. I tried to find the man who had fathered a child and never acknowledged her, who had divorced a woman without ensuring she could survive, who had then married me and let me believe we were struggling together towards something better. I tried to find the man I had loved, and instead I found a stranger whose face was frozen in time, forever 29 years old, forever smiling that smile that I now understood was a lie. I put the photograph away. I locked my bedroom door. I called David Chen and I asked him one question. How much money are we talking about? He told me. The numbers made my vision swim. The properties alone were worth approximately $87 million. The offshore accounts contained $23 million. There were stocks, bonds, investment accounts with another $32 million. The income from just the residential properties was enough to generate $3 million per year in rent alone. This is impossible, I whispered. David didn't argue. He simply said, it's yours, if you claim it, if you want it. I sat in silence for a long time after hanging up. Then I asked David to show me everything, every property, every tenant, every contract, every lease, every eviction notice, every payment, every detail of the empire my husband had built while I worked in a data entry room under fluorescent lights that buzzed like insects trapped in a jar, while I saved money by buying generic cereal and wearing the same 5 blouses to work, while I sewn patches into his shirts and told myself this was what love looked like. David agreed to meet me the following morning. That night, I watched Emma and Thomas prepare dinner. They were laughing about something, some office drama, some joke I didn't understand because I existed in a different universe from them, one where I was always slightly outside their world, always slightly less important, always slightly in the way. Thomas kissed Emma's cheek and asked if dinner would be ready soon. They didn't ask about my day. They never asked about my day. I had been living in their home for 3 years, ever since my lease had ended, and the landlord had raised the rent beyond what I could afford on my data entry salary. Emma had said I could stay. Thomas had said I could stay. What they meant was that I could stay if I paid rent to them and bought the groceries and cleaned the apartment and cared for Oliver after school and prepared most of the meals. What they meant was that I could stay as long as I made myself smaller every single day. I looked at my daughter's face, and I felt something cold and sharp move through my chest. I felt something crystallizing inside me, something hard and certain and absolutely without mercy. Saturday morning, I met David Chen at his office, and we spent 8 hours reviewing the complete portfolio. He pulled up property after property on his computer screen, showing me the details, the tenants, the revenue streams, the maintenance costs, the profit margins. I took notes in a spiral notebook, my handwriting precise and mechanical, the way it had been trained to be after years of data entry work. As David walked me through each holding, I began to see patterns. I saw which properties were generating the most income. I saw which tenants were reliable. I saw which buildings had structural issues that would require significant investment. And then I saw something else. I saw a name appearing repeatedly in the commercial lease documentation: Thomas Torres, my daughter's husband. The man who treated me with barely concealed contempt, who looked at me the way someone looks at a piece of furniture that has outlived its usefulness. Thomas's consulting company occupied the 3rd floor of a building in the financial district. The building was owned by Meridian Capital Holdings. Thomas's company was 3 months behind on rent. The owed amount was $47,000. My hands began to shake as I looked at that number. $47,000 that my husband's company, now my company, could have forgiven at any time, could have absorbed as a cost of doing business, but instead had allowed to accumulate, had allowed to become a liability, had allowed to become a weapon. "Can I evict them?" I asked David. He looked at me carefully, and I saw something shift in his expression. He was beginning to understand what I was considering. "Legally," he said slowly, "yes. The lease allows for eviction proceedings after 60 days of non-payment. Your company is currently at 90 days. I nodded. I felt something crystallizing inside me, something hard and cold and absolutely certain. "I want to see the residential properties," I said. "Specifically, I want to see the one where Emma and Thomas live." David pulled up the file. The building was a mid-rise apartment complex in a desirable neighborhood. My daughter and her husband lived in a 2-bedroom unit on the 7th floor. They were paying $1,800 per month in rent. The file showed that the property had recently been reevaluated, that comparable units in the area were now renting for significantly more, that the current tenants were paying below market rates. "What would be market rate for their unit?" I asked. David hesitated. "Approximately $5,400 per month," he said quietly. "But Ms. Donnelly, I need to understand what you're planning here." I told him. I told him everything. I told him that I wanted to triple their rent. I told him that I wanted to begin eviction proceedings against Thomas's company. I told him that I wanted to find out who owned the corporation where Thomas worked as a consultant and whether they had any financial vulnerabilities. I told him that I wanted to research Thomas's personal finances, his credit history, his debts, his entire life laid bare so that I could understand exactly which pressure points would cause the most damage. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I need to know what you're planning because I need to decide whether I can help you." I looked at him directly. "I'm planning to destroy him," I said. "I'm planning to make him feel what it's like to have the ground disappear from beneath your feet. I'm planning to make him understand that there are consequences for treating people like they don't matter. I'm planning to use my husband's money to teach my daughter's husband exactly how small a person can become when the universe decides to crush them." Instead of hanging up, instead of refusing, instead of doing what any moral person would do, David said, "There's more you should know. The company where Thomas works is on the verge of bankruptcy. There's been an accounting scandal. One of the senior partners has been embezzling for 3 years. The news will break publicly within the next month." I understood then what David was telling me. I understood that the universe had already begun the work of destruction. I was simply going to accelerate it. I was simply going to ensure that it was total and complete and devastating. "Show me what else is vulnerable," I said. For the next 4 hours, David showed me the infrastructure of destruction. He showed me Thomas's personal credit reports, which revealed that he had accumulated significant debt beyond his salary. Credit cards, a car loan, a personal loan taken out under false pretenses from his father before they had had a falling out. He showed me that Thomas had once been the golden child of a wealthy family, that he had been cut off after refusing to join the family business, that he had been explicitly disowned in a letter that was filed in court documents during the divorce proceedings from his first marriage. He showed me that Thomas had been married before, to a woman named Sarah who had borne him a child before he had abandoned them both. He showed me the court records, the child support orders he had violated repeatedly, the wage garnishment orders that had eventually become so complicated that they had been abandoned by the court system. I understood then that Thomas and I had something in common. We both understood what it meant to be judged and found wanting. The difference was that I was going to use his destruction as a teaching tool. The difference was that I was going to stop being small. The difference was that I was going to finally use my voice. "Can you access the information?" I asked David. "Can you use the resources available to you to ensure that when I move against him, it's total?" David looked at me for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "My mother spent 32 years with a man who kept secrets from her. He told her that money was tight when he was actually building an empire. He told her that they couldn't afford things when he was spending thousands on a second family. He told her he loved her while he was systematically stealing her dignity and her belief in herself. When she found out, after he had already died, she was devastated. But do you know what destroyed her more? The fact that she had spent 32 years being invisible. The fact that she had made herself so small that even when the truth came out, even when she finally had resources, she didn't know how to be large enough to use them. She used them to buy things. She used them to travel to places that meant nothing to her. She used them to prove to people who didn't care that she was worth something. And she was alone when she did it. I won't help someone else become invisible. I won't help someone else waste what they've been given on revenge instead of healing." I should have listened to him. I should have understood what he was telling me. Instead, I heard only the refusal to help, and I decided that I would find someone else. I decided that I would use the resources available to me through the property management company, through the lawyers Marcus had employed, through the accountants who managed the offshore holdings. I decided that I would do this myself if I had to, that I would learn to be large, that I would learn to use power, that I would learn to destroy the people who had destroyed me. I thanked David politely and told him I no longer needed his services. I hired a different property management company, one that asked fewer questions and seemed to understand that I was not interested in ethics or conversation. I prepared the paperwork myself. I drafted the letters. I calculated the numbers with the same precision that years of data entry work had trained into me. I was going to be meticulous. I was going to be perfect. I was going to be absolutely without mercy. The eviction notice for Thomas's company was filed on Monday morning. By Tuesday, Emma called me into the living room, her face pale, her hands shaking. "Mom," she said, "we received a notice. Our landlord is tripling the rent. He says it's due to market adjustments and building improvements. He says the increase takes effect in 30 days. I looked at my daughter's confused expression and I waited to feel something, guilt perhaps, or satisfaction. Instead, I felt only the deep numbness of someone executing a plan that had already been decided by forces beyond my control, by the universe, by justice, by the simple fact that some people deserve what happens to them. "That's unfortunate," I said quietly. "Have you checked your lease? Is it legal?" Emma scrolled through the document on her phone, her face growing paler with each line she read. "It's legal," she whispered. "It's all legal. But we can't afford $5,400. We can barely afford 18. I nodded sympathetically, the way one nods at a stranger's misfortune, someone whose suffering is real but has nothing to do with you. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said, and I went back to my room. Through the wall, I could hear Thomas's voice rising in anger. I could hear him pacing, the sound of his feet hitting the floor in an agitated rhythm that suggested his mind was racing faster than his body could keep up with. I could hear him on the phone with lawyers, with his bank, with people whose names I didn't know, all of them trying to find a way to make numbers work that had been deliberately arranged so that they would never work. I felt a strange satisfaction in this. I felt a sensation of power that was almost sexual in its intensity. For 59 years, I had been small. I had been grateful for crumbs. I had accepted that my role in life was to disappear into the background, to make myself useful, to never ask for more than I was given. And now, finally, I was large. I was the one controlling the game. I was the one who could make phone calls and watch people's lives collapse. I lay in bed and listened to my daughter weeping on the other side of the wall. And I told myself that this was justice. I told myself that this was what she deserved for allowing me to be treated like a servant. I told myself that this was what Thomas deserved for his contempt, for his assumptions about my insignificance. I told myself that this was righteous. I told myself that this was good. By Wednesday, Thomas's company received formal notice of eviction proceedings. By Thursday, David called me with news that the accounting scandal had broken public. The firm where Thomas worked as a consultant had been front-page news. 3 senior partners were facing criminal charges. The firm was implementing an immediate hiring freeze and would be laying off 30% of their workforce within the week. Thomas was not among the first wave of cuts, but his position was clearly vulnerable. I could see the dominoes beginning to fall, each one triggering the next, each consequence building on the previous one, creating a cascade of destruction that would eventually swallow everything. By Friday afternoon, Thomas received notice that his contract was being terminated, effective immediately. I watched him come home that evening, his face gray, his movements slow, his entire body suggesting that he had understood, finally, what it meant to have the world collapse beneath your feet. Emma was crying on the sofa when he arrived. Oliver was drawing quietly in the corner with colored pencils, his small face concentrated on the task in front of him, unaware that the ground beneath his world was beginning to crack. "They're saying it's temporary," Thomas told Emma, but his voice carried no conviction. "I'll find something else. I have contacts. I have experience. Someone will hire me." He was wrong. I had made sure of that. Through careful conversations with his former colleagues, conversations conducted by lawyers and accountants who understood my intentions perfectly, I had ensured that whispers would follow him. Whispers that suggested he had been involved in the accounting scandal. Whispers that suggested he might be under investigation. Whispers that suggested that hiring him would be a liability. The lies were not substantial enough to be provably false, but they were sticky enough to cling to his reputation like tar, to spread whenever he applied for a job, to poison every opportunity before it could fully develop. I sat in my bedroom and listened to my daughter's sobs, and I felt absolutely nothing. The apartment eviction proceedings moved forward with the inexorable momentum of a machine that has been set in motion and cannot be stopped. A court date was set for 6 weeks out, but the damage was done immediately. Emma called her actual mother, the woman who had given birth to her, who had been dead for 15 years before Emma had learned that she didn't need anyone, and spent hours on the phone with her siblings, begging for money, begging for help, begging for some indication that she was not alone in the universe. The responses were variations on no. One brother said he had his own problems. One sister said she couldn't afford to get involved. Her father, remarried and living in Florida, said that Emma had made her choices and would have to live with them. I heard my daughter through the wall, and I told myself that this was what she deserved for allowing me to be diminished. I told myself that this was what happened when you forgot about the people who had sacrificed everything for you. I told myself that this was justice, though even as I told myself these things, I could feel something else moving beneath the story I was constructing, something darker and more honest, something that looked a great deal like cruelty. Thomas called his parents, and I heard his side of the conversation through the apartment walls that suddenly seemed far too thin. Yes, he said, he knew he had made mistakes. Yes, he knew he had disappointed them. Yes, he understood that they had disowned him after he refused to join the family business, after he had insisted on living his own life, after he had exercised the kind of autonomy that his parents had apparently not granted him permission to exercise. Could they please, just this once, help him? The answer came back in a voice that was audible even from my room, cold and dismissive. You made your choices. Live with them. I understood in that moment that Thomas and I had something else in common beyond our shared experience of betrayal. We both knew what it meant to be judged and found wanting by people we had trusted. We both knew what it meant to be cast out, to be told that we were not worthy of love or help or basic human dignity. The difference was that I was using his pain as a weapon, and he had used mine as a convenience. By the second week, the financial cascade had begun in earnest and taken on the shape of something almost natural, as if it was simply the way the universe worked rather than something I had deliberately constructed. Emma and Thomas's credit cards were maxed out within 10 days, trying to cover expenses they could no longer afford. Their savings account, which my research had revealed to contain never more than $8,000, was depleted trying to make the rent on a building that was no longer going to accept their money. They began missing payments on their car. Thomas's attempts to find new work were failing in exactly the way I had ensured they would fail. Companies that had contacted him before suddenly claimed they had no openings. Job interviews were scheduled and then canceled by automated systems that gave no explanation. One recruiter told him directly that his background had some red flags that needed to be cleared up first, red flags that existed nowhere except in the careful narratives I had constructed through intermediaries. Oliver asked his father why his parents were fighting more. Emma snapped at him, something she had never done before, something that suggested the stress was beginning to fracture her in ways that could not be repaired. I watched this unfold from my room, and I felt the fever in my blood intensify. I had not expected to feel anything watching this slow-motion catastrophe. I had prepared myself to be clinical, detached, objective, like someone studying the behavior of insects under glass. But what I felt instead was intoxication. It was a sensation of power that was almost orgasmic in its intensity, a rush that came from understanding that I could make phone calls and watch people's lives collapse, that I could move money and watch families disintegrate, that I could finally stop being small. For 59 years, I had been a ghost in my own life. I had been grateful for the scraps I was given. I had accepted that my role in the universe was to disappear, to make myself useful, to never ask for more than I deserved. And now I was discovering that I was capable of being something else entirely. I was discovering that I could be large. I was discovering that I could be powerful. I was discovering that I could be ruthless. It was intoxicating. It was also, though I did not know it yet, the moment I became something other than a victim. I became a perpetrator. I became the kind of person who could destroy a child's world and sleep soundly at night because I had convinced myself that the child's father deserved it. By the third week, David called me with an unexpected complication that would force me to confront the boundaries of my carefully constructed revenge. "There's been a development," he said, and his voice carried the weight of someone who had been wrestling with a moral decision and had finally decided to break his silence. "The property manager for your commercial building contacted me. There's a tenant in one of the other offices who has inquired about purchasing the building. They're offering significantly above market value. They're offering $89 million for a property that's valued at $72 million. I asked who was interested in buying the building. David hesitated, and in that hesitation I understood that he had already known the answer before he called me, that he had been debating whether to tell me at all. "A company called Chen Holdings," he said finally. The owner is a woman named Sophie Chen. My breath stopped. Sophie Chen, the daughter, the secret, the living proof that Marcus had been compartmentalizing his existence long before he ever knew me, that he had been capable of building separate lives the way other people build separate rooms in a house. "What does she want with the building?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. David said, "I don't know her exact motivations, but she's been asking a lot of questions. She's been asking about the ownership structure. She's been asking about the history of the property. She's been asking about whether there are any other holdings she should know about. She's building a case for her inheritance claim, and she's doing it by following the money." I understood what had happened. Sophie had discovered some thread of information, the misfiled will, perhaps, or a piece of documentation that had surfaced through genealogical research, and had pulled on it and was watching the entire tapestry of her father's hidden world begin to unravel. She was looking for Marcus. She was looking for answers about why he had abandoned her, why he had never acknowledged her, why she had grown up believing that her existence was somehow shameful or unworthy of recognition. And she was about to collide directly with my revenge, which meant she was about to collide directly with me. I asked David to arrange a meeting with her. He said, "Are you sure? Once you meet her, once you acknowledge what she represents, you can't pretend she doesn't exist." I said, "I'm not sure about anything anymore, but I'm going to do it anyway." Sophie Chen arrived at David's office on a Thursday morning, and I saw my husband's face reflected in hers in a way that was almost painful in its clarity. The eyes were the same dark brown. The set of the jaw was the same sharp angle. The way she held her shoulders, defensive and ready for rejection, suggested that she had spent her entire life bracing for disappointment. She was wearing clothes that had been washed too many times, and her shoes had been repaired at the heel with professional care but obvious necessity. She carried a folder of documents, and her hands shook slightly as she opened them. Before she could speak, I said, "I know who you are." Sophie's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice was hollow and unconvincing. I told her about Marcus. I told her about the will. I told her about the 30% of the estate that should have been hers by law, but had been lost in administrative error. I told her about the inheritance that Marcus had apparently intended for her, but had never managed to finalize before his heart gave out while he was sitting in his office, probably thinking about one of his many hidden lives, but not about me, his wife, who would find out 4 years after his death that I had never really known him at all. Sophie listened without speaking, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. When I finished, she pulled out a photograph and placed it on the desk between us. 2 children, maybe 5 years old, identical faces with Marcus's eyes and someone else's mouth. "My twins," she said quietly. "David and Emma. I named them after people I loved, people I wanted them to be like, not knowing their grandfather had the same name as one of them, not knowing I was walking around with proof of my own existence in my pocket every single day." She put the photograph away carefully, as if it was made of something fragile that might shatter if mishandled. "I've been alone with these 2 since I was 30 years old. I worked 3 jobs to keep them in school. I paid for their therapy after they were diagnosed with cerebral palsy. Nobody helped me, nobody knew, nobody cared. And Marcus Donnelly, their grandfather, was building an empire while I was choosing between buying groceries and paying rent." I realized I was listening to my own life story, told in a different voice, from a different perspective, and the symmetry of it nearly broke something in my chest that I had thought was already broken beyond repair. That afternoon, after Sophie left David's office, I did something I had not planned to do. I told Sophie the complete truth about myself. I told her about the data entry job and the patched shirts and the $4,000 I had given Emma for a vacation I would never take. I told her about coming home to discover that my husband had a secret life that was infinitely more real than our marriage. I told her about the revenge I was orchestrating against Emma and Thomas. I told her about the eviction notices and the tripled rent and the carefully constructed campaign to destroy my son-in-law's life and career. I told her about the satisfaction I felt when I listened to my daughter weeping through the apartment walls. I told her about the fever in my blood. And when I finished, Sophie was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You're destroying your daughter to hurt your husband. But he's already dead. You're just making sure everyone he left behind is destroyed too." The words landed like a physical blow, like a fist to the sternum, like something that stopped my heart and then started it again in a way that was painful and real. "That's not what I'm doing," I said. But even as I said it, I could hear the lie in my voice, the desperation, the need to believe that what I was doing could be justified by appealing to some higher principle of justice. Sophie shook her head. "Your husband compartmentalized his life. He had me on one side and you on the other, and he never let either of you know about the other, and he built an empire while both of us suffered. And now you're doing the same thing he did. You're compartmentalizing. You're creating two separate realities, one where you're a victim who deserves justice, and one where you're a perpetrator who's destroying innocence. You're becoming him. You're becoming the person who destroyed both of our lives." I wanted to argue with her. I wanted to tell her that she didn't understand, that Thomas deserved this, that Emma deserved this, that I deserved to use my power however I saw fit. But I couldn't, because Sophie was right. And more than that, David entered the room then, and he said, "There's something else you need to know." David pulled out a file that made his hands shake slightly as he opened it. "I discovered something in the documentation," he said carefully. "Something that connects all of you in a way that none of you have understood yet." He placed a birth certificate on the table. It was old, dated 15 years ago, with a name I recognized, David Chen Torres. The father's name on the certificate was Thomas Torres. The mother's name was Sophie Chen. My hands began to tremble as I understood what David was telling me. "Thomas is the biological father of Sophie's son," David said quietly. "He left her when she told him she was pregnant. She raised their child alone while he built a life with your daughter. He abandoned one family to construct another. He's been doing what Marcus did. He's been compartmentalizing his existence." Sophie's face had gone very still. "I didn't know how to tell him," she said to no one in particular. "When I was pregnant, he said he wasn't ready. He said he needed time to figure out his life. I told him I would do it alone if I had to. I meant it, and he took me at my word. He left. He married Emma a year later, and for 15 years I raised David alone while Thomas pretended that his son didn't exist." I looked at Sophie's face, and I saw the mirror image of my own suffering reflected back at me, and I understood that the revenge I had constructed was not justice. It was the perpetuation of a cycle of abandonment and harm that had started long before I was born, that would continue long after I died, that would consume everyone in its path unless someone found the strength to break it. "I need to stop," I said. The words felt like they were being torn from somewhere very deep inside me, from a place that still contained the woman who had loved Marcus, the woman who had believed in loyalty and sacrifice and the redemptive power of devotion. "I need to stop this before it kills someone." Sophie said, "It's too late for that. It's already killing someone. It's killing me every time I look at my son and see the father who abandoned us. It's killing me every time I see the eviction notices on the building where my father once worked, where I've never been acknowledged, where I was trying to buy a piece of his legacy, and I can't even do that without it costing someone their home." She pulled out her phone and showed me photographs. Her twins, now 15 years old, both using mobility assistance devices, both smiling at the camera with a joy that seemed impossible given everything they had survived. "They ask about their father," she said. "They ask why he left. They ask if it was something they did, something about being disabled that made him not want to know them. And I have to tell them that sometimes people are not capable of being what we need them to be. I'm teaching them that lesson while their father is about to lose everything because his mother-in-law decided to wage war on her dead husband through him. I realized I had created a weapon and then handed it to someone who had every moral right to use it. And now I was asking her to put it down while her own child suffered in the background, invisible and unacknowledged, the way I had been invisible and unacknowledged for so long. The call came at 2 a.m. Emma's voice was barely audible through the phone, fragmented and terrified and barely holding together. "Mom, you need to come. Thomas, something's wrong with Thomas. He's not responsive." I went to the hospital, and I found my daughter sitting in a waiting room under fluorescent lights that turned her skin the color of death. Thomas was in the emergency room. He had taken pills, sleeping pills, painkillers, antacids, anything he could find in the medicine cabinet of the apartment that was about to be taken from him. He had arranged them in a careful line on the bathroom counter and swallowed them one by one. Oliver had found him unconscious and had somehow, in the terrible lucidity that children sometimes possess during moments of crisis, remembered his emergency training from school. He had called 911. He had told them his father was hurt. He had performed the actions of a 7-year-old trying to save the life of the man he loved. When the paramedics arrived, Thomas was still breathing, but barely. They pumped his stomach. They monitored his vitals. They admitted him to psychiatric hold. And I sat in that waiting room with my daughter, and I understood that the line between justice and murder is sometimes only the difference between dying quickly or dying slowly. I had chosen slow death. I had orchestrated it carefully, brick by brick, consequence by consequence. And my grandson had almost paid the ultimate price for my rage. Emma looked at me with eyes that had aged a decade in the past 3 weeks, eyes that contained a kind of devastation that could not be repaired by any amount of apology or explanation. "Why?" she asked. "Why is this happening? What did we do?" I opened my mouth to speak, and I discovered that there were no words adequate to the situation. I could not say that her husband had treated me disrespectfully. I could not say that she had allowed me to be diminished in my own family. I could not say that I had discovered a secret empire and decided to use it as a weapon without considering the consequences. There was no explanation that would not sound like justification, no story I could tell that would make this right. So I told her the truth. I told her about Marcus. I told her about the 23 properties. I told her about Sophie. I told her about the revenge I had constructed. I told her about the eviction notices and the tripled rent and the carefully orchestrated campaign to destroy her husband's life. And I told her that I was stopping it. All of it. Effective immediately, I was stopping it. I was going to reverse the eviction notices. I was going to lower the rent back to what it had been. I was going to use my resources to help Thomas get the kind of psychiatric help he needed. I was going to stop being the woman I had become. Emma's face crumpled. "Why would you do this to us?" she asked. "Why would you do this to your grandson? I trusted you. I let you live with us. I gave you a home." And there it was. The acknowledgement that our arrangement had never been about love or family or the bonds that connect generations. It had been transactional. She had given me a home, and I had been expected to repay her with invisibility and gratitude and the suppression of every need or desire of my own. "You didn't give me a home," I said quietly, my voice breaking. "You gave me a room, and I accepted it because I believed that was all I deserved. But I should have demanded more. I should have demanded to be seen. I should have demanded to be valued. And instead, I became the thing I hated. I became someone who made other people invisible." I reached for her hand and she pulled away, not in anger but in exhaustion, in the kind of emotional depletion that comes from discovering that someone you trusted has betrayed you in ways you could never have imagined. "I need to check on Thomas," she said. "I need to be with my husband." I sat alone in that waiting room for another hour, and I understood that some betrayals are so profound that even stopping them cannot undo the damage. The disease has already spread through the body. All you can do is try not to add more poison. David came to the hospital at dawn, moving like a man who hadn't slept, like a man who had been wrestling with his conscience all night and had finally arrived at a decision. "I pulled the eviction notices," he said. "I've contacted the property management company and reversed all of the changes. The rent is back to $1,800. The commercial debt has been forgiven. I've reached out to Thomas's former contacts and corrected the misinformation about the accounting scandal. I can't undo everything, but I'm trying to stop the bleeding." I thanked him, and he shook his head. "Don't thank me," he said. "I'm stopping because Sophie asked me to. I'm stopping because my mother died believing she deserved everything bad that happened to her, and I won't be part of that legacy anymore." He sat down next to me, and he looked exhausted in a way that suggested he had been carrying the weight of this situation for longer than I had. "Sophie is at the apartment with Emma," he continued. "She's helping her understand what happened. She's talking about her own experience, about raising a child alone, about the cost of abandonment. She's trying to help because she understands that destroying Thomas doesn't make what he did to her any less real, and it doesn't bring her father back, and it doesn't change the fact that her twins still need to know who their father is, even if that knowledge is painful." I asked what Sophie wanted from me. David said, "I think she wants you to want the same thing she does. A world where people acknowledge their mistakes and try to do better, instead of a world where they destroy each other in the name of justice." He pulled out his phone and showed me messages between him and Sophie. She had written, "Margaret is suffering the way I've suffered. She's become invisible, and now that she has power, she's using it the way invisible people always do, by making other people invisible too. But we can stop this. We can break the cycle. We can choose to be better than the people who hurt us." I read those words, and I felt something shift inside me, something that had been frozen beginning to thaw, something that had been hard beginning to soften. I began to cry, and I cried in a way I had not cried since discovering Marcus's empire, cried from a place so deep that it felt like my body was purging something toxic, something that had been poisoning me from the inside out. When I returned to the apartment, I found Sophie sitting at the kitchen table with Emma. They were drinking coffee. Emma's face was swollen from crying, but her eyes were clearer than they had been, as if the act of understanding what had happened had somehow moved her from confusion into a kind of terrible clarity. Sophie stood when she saw me. "I know who you are," she said. "Your daughter told me everything. And I need to tell you something about yourself that you need to hear." She pulled out the photographs of her twins, the children I had never met, the grandchildren of my husband that I had not even known existed until recently. "My father left me a legacy of abandonment," she said. "Your husband left you a legacy of invisibility. He left me money he never acknowledged, and he left you love he never expressed. And now you have a choice. You can keep that legacy alive by destroying everyone around you, or you can break it. You can choose to be the one who stops the cycle. You can choose to be the mother your daughter needs, instead of the victim your husband made you into." I looked at my daughter. I looked at Sophie. I looked at the photographs of the twins, and I made a choice that was not revenge. It was harder than revenge. It was more painful than revenge. It required surrendering the story I had constructed about my own righteousness. It required accepting that I had been capable of cruelty. It required accepting that I would have to spend the rest of my life learning to be different. The next morning, I went to the hospital, and I sat with Thomas while he recovered from the overdose. He was hooked up to monitors that beeped in rhythmic patterns, his stomach pumped, his body moving toward healing against his conscious will, his body choosing to survive even though his mind had decided that survival was no longer possible. I took his hand, and I told him I was sorry. He looked at me with eyes that had seen the bottom of despair and were trying to climb back, with eyes that suggested he had understood something about the nature of suffering that I was only beginning to comprehend. "I know you are," he said quietly. "Emma told me what you did. She told me about the money and the revenge and all of it, and I understand it. I understand why you did it." He paused, struggling with words that seemed difficult to access, as if his voice was a muscle that had atrophied from disuse. I left Sophie because I was a coward. I didn't want to face what I had created. I didn't want to acknowledge that there was a child in the world who had my blood and my eyes, but not my name, not my support, not my presence. I wanted to pretend it wasn't real. So I married Emma because she needed me to be strong, and I was so tired of being weak, so I just kept running. I kept running, and eventually I ran so far that there was nowhere left to go except here, to this hospital room, to this moment where I finally stopped. Tears ran down his face. I'm going to pay Sophie back. Not just money, time, acknowledgement. I'm going to be present for my son. I'm going to stop running from the person I am. I believed him, or at least I wanted to believe him. And I realized that wanting to believe someone, even after they have destroyed your trust, even after they have revealed themselves to be capable of abandonment, is the first step toward rebuilding a family, toward choosing forgiveness, not because it erases the harm that was done, but because it stops the harm from continuing. Sophie and I made an appointment with a lawyer. Together, we filed paperwork asserting her legal claim to 30% of Marcus's estate. Instead of fighting her, as I could have done, as I had initially planned to do, I stipulated to her inheritance. I agreed to a division of assets that was financially devastating to me but equitable to her, that acknowledged the reality of her existence, that said to her, "You matter, you have always mattered, and the fact that your father did not acknowledge you was his failure, not yours." The lawyer was shocked. "You don't have to do this," he said. I told him I did. I told him that I had inherited my late husband's sins, that I had learned to compartmentalize the way he had, that the only way to stop inheriting them was to interrupt the pattern deliberately and consciously, and at great cost to myself. Sophie's twins received notification that they had inherited a trust fund. Thomas received financial support to pay Sophie the back support he owed her, the debt he had accumulated through years of absence and denial. Emma and I began the slow, painful process of learning how to be a mother and daughter instead of caretaker and dependent, instead of victim and perpetrator, instead of two women locked in a dance of resentment and obligation. Oliver slowly began to understand that his world, while profoundly changed, was not ending, that his father was still his father even though his father was broken, that his grandmother was still his grandmother even though his grandmother was capable of great harm. The physical space of the apartment remained the same, but the emotional atmosphere shifted. There was less anger, there was more honesty. There was the tentative beginning of something that might eventually become healing. I never fully forgave Marcus because I realized that forgiveness assumes understanding, and I would never understand how he had managed to be so many different people simultaneously, how he had compartmentalized his existence so completely that he could look in the mirror and recognize the face looking back at him. But I forgave myself, or at least I began the process of forgiving myself, which is much slower and more difficult work than forgiving anyone else could ever be. It requires looking at yourself and acknowledging that you are capable of cruelty, that you are capable of using power to destroy, that you are capable of becoming exactly what you hated about the people who hurt you. It requires sitting with that knowledge and choosing to be different anyway. I visited Sophie's apartment on a Saturday afternoon, and her twins showed me their room. They were reading books about accessible travel destinations. They were planning a trip to Costa Rica where they wanted to learn about sustainable agriculture. Their father, Thomas, had started spending time with them. He was learning about their condition, their capabilities, their dreams. He was present in a way that suggested genuine change rather than performative redemption, that suggested he understood that presence itself was a form of love, that suggested he was finally learning to stop running. The months that followed were not happy exactly, but they were honest in a way that happiness could never be. Emma and I had difficult conversations about what our relationship had been and what it could become. We talked about the ways I had made myself small and the ways she had benefited from my smallness. We talked about the ways she had diminished me and the ways I had allowed myself to be diminished. We talked about the future and whether there was any possibility of rebuilding trust. Thomas continued to see a therapist, and slowly rebuilt his capacity to function in the world, to show up for people, to be present instead of fleeing. I began to spend time with my inheritance in ways that felt consistent with the person I was becoming. I created a fund for single mothers. I invested in accessible housing. I made sure that Sophie's twins had every resource they needed for their education and their lives. I was not saving anyone. I was not performing redemption. I was simply trying to ensure that the invisible people, the women working in windowless offices, the mothers alone with their children, the children with disabilities whose dreams were considered impossible, received the investment and attention that Marcus should have given to them while he was alive, but didn't, because he was too busy building his empire while I was making myself smaller and smaller. 1 year after the overdose, Thomas and Sophie invited me to a gathering. They had decided to create a scholarship fund in the name of David Chen Torres, Sophie's son and Thomas's biological child. The scholarship would support young people with disabilities pursuing higher education. Thomas spoke about his own struggles, his own failures, his own journey toward becoming a person who could acknowledge his mistakes. Sophie spoke about raising her twins alone and the financial devastation that single parenthood had created. Emma spoke about her mother, about the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming, about the possibility of transformation, even when it seemed too late. Oliver, now 8 years old, read a poem he had written about his family. It was uncertain and childlike and utterly devastating in its innocence. There was no triumph in this gathering. There was no sense of a problem solved or a wound healed. There was only the acknowledgement that we were all trying, in our different ways, to be better than the people we had been. And sometimes, in certain moments, we succeeded. And in those moments, it was enough.